When my grandfather died, the house felt hollow in a way I hadn't expected, not because of grief alone, but because the silence exposed everything that had always been there. He was the only one in my family who treated me like a full human being, not a spare child, not an inconvenience, just me. The will was read 2 weeks later. My parents sat stiff and impatient, already confident they knew how it would end. They had spent years managing his appointments, his medications, his paperwork. Or so they liked to tell people. I had lived with him the last 4 years of his life. I cooked, cleaned, drove him to physical therapy, listened when he couldn't sleep, and learned more about who he really was than anyone else ever bothered to ask. Hey, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the bell. Your support means everything and helps me keep creating. Thank you so much. The will shattered their certainty. My grandfather left me the house, his savings, and controlling interest in a small but valuable commercial property he'd owned for decades. My parents received a fixed sum each. Not small, but nowhere near what they believed they deserved. The room went cold. My mother's face hardened instantly. My father didn't even look at me. He stared at the lawyer like the man had personally insulted him. They didn't wait long to respond. Within a month, I was served papers. They were suing me, claiming I had manipulated an elderly man, isolated him, coerced him into rewriting the will. They said I had taken advantage of his declining health. They said I didn't deserve a cent. What they didn't mention was how rarely they visited, or how they dismissed his confusion as weakness, or how often he asked me to promise I wouldn't let them undo what he chose. The court date arrived faster than I expected. I walked into the courtroom alone. No dramatic outfit, no show, just documents neatly organized, posture steady, heart loud but controlled. My parents arrived with an expensive attorney and a confidence that bordered on smugness. They nodded at the judge, like they already belonged there. When the judge asked me to step forward, my mother finally looked at me. There was something sharp in her expression. Not anger, calculation. She still thought this was going to be easy. The judge didn't start with accusations. He asked questions, simple ones, about my grandfather's daily routine, his medical condition, his habits, his state of mind in the final years. I answered calmly, precisely, without embellishment, dates, names, details. Then the judge paused, leaned back slightly, and looked at me in a way that wasn't judgmental. It was curious. And that was the moment my parents began to realize this wasn't going the way they'd planned. My parents' lawyer stood up with rehearsed confidence. He painted a clean story. A lonely old man, a vulnerable mind, a young grandchild who conveniently moved in and slowly took control. He spoke smoothly, like this version of events had been polished in advance, tested, perfected. He didn't look at me once. Then the judge asked for evidence. That was when the tone shifted. The lawyer produced statements from neighbors who claimed they rarely saw my parents around the house. He tried to twist that into proof of isolation. Medical notes were mentioned selectively, skipping anything that suggested clarity or independence. It sounded convincing on the surface. That was the plan. The judge listened without interruption. He took notes. He asked a few pointed questions that forced the lawyer to backtrack slightly. Nothing dramatic, just enough to reveal cracks. Then it was my turn. I didn't rush. I handed over a binder, not thick for show, organized, labeled, boring in the best way. Inside were years of records, appointment logs with my name signed in as caregiver, emails from doctors confirming my grandfather's competence at the time the will was updated, video call records showing my parents canceling visits again and again, bank statements proving I never touched his money beyond groceries and utilities, all documented. The judge flipped through slowly. Then I submitted something else. A notarized letter written by my grandfather, dated months before his death. Not a will. A statement. In his own words. Calm, firm, unmistakably him. He explained why he made his choices. Why he trusted me. Why he feared his own children would try to undo his wishes once he was gone. The room felt smaller after that. My mother shifted in her seat. My father whispered something sharply to their lawyer. The lawyer cleared his throat and tried to object, claiming emotional manipulation. The judge shut it down immediately. Then came the part they truly didn't expect. The judge asked if there were any witnesses to my role as caregiver. 3 people stood. A home nurse who had worked with my grandfather for over a year. She described his sharp memory, his stubborn independence, and how he insisted on handling his own decisions. She also mentioned how relieved he was to have me there, how often he worried about being treated like a burden by his own children. Then his financial advisor, an older man who spoke plainly. He confirmed my grandfather had discussed the will extensively, rationally, repeatedly, that he had never expressed confusion, that he was, in his words, painfully clear about what he wanted. Finally, a neighbor, someone my parents barely acknowledged existed. She described seeing me daily, cooking, gardening with him, sitting outside late into the evening, just talking. She also described how rarely my parents showed up and how tense things became when they did. The judge didn't hide his reaction. He asked my parents directly why they hadn't contested the will while my grandfather was alive, if they believed he was being manipulated. My father hesitated. My mother answered too quickly. She said they trusted family, that they didn't imagine betrayal. The judge raised an eyebrow. He asked another question. Why, if they believed I had control over my grandfather, did they continue to let him live independently with me rather than involve authorities or medical professionals? Silence stretched. Their lawyer tried to step in. The judge waved him off. Then he did something that changed everything. He asked my parents if they had read the letter my grandfather left. They hadn't. The judge read a single paragraph aloud. Just one. The part where my grandfather wrote that he loved his children, but no longer trusted them to respect his choices. Where he said he was tired of being treated like a resource instead of a person. My mother's face flushed. My father stared at the floor. The judge set the letter down carefully. At that point, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about intent. And the judge was no longer deciding between two sides. He was protecting a dead man's final decision from people who had never bothered to protect him while he was alive. The judge didn't raise his voice when he delivered the ruling. He didn't need to. Every word landed clean and final. The lawsuit was dismissed in full. The will was upheld without modification. He stated clearly that there was no evidence of coercion, manipulation, or incompetence. What there was, he added, was a consistent pattern of neglect followed by entitlement. My parents didn't react right away. It was like they were waiting for a loophole, a last-minute rescue. None came. The judge looked directly at them and said something that stayed with me. He said inheritance is not a reward for biology. It's a reflection of trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't revive itself just because money is involved. Outside the courtroom, they tried to speak to me. I didn't stop.